Whenever you're ready.
Okay, so we can get started and hope more people will keep joining to the webinar. So good morning, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you are. So welcome again to Speaking of Oats. So my name is Pablo Olivera. I'm director of Oat Global. And Speaking of Oats, as you know, it's a partnership between the Oat newsletter and Oat Global. And with me today is Charlene White, which is the editor of the Oat newsletter, and she will co-lead the webinar today. So Speaking of Oats is back after the summer break, so it's great to see faces again. For today's webinar, instead of having like a typical scientific presentation that we've been having before, we wanted to take the opportunity to reach the Oat community and hear your thoughts and opinions about our communication and community engagement platforms. So we decided to call today's webinar or workshop like Keeping the Oat Community Connected. All of you receive a survey about the Oat newsletter, Oat Global, and the Speaking of Oat webinar series. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to go through the survey and answer all the questions. So we are really very happy with the response rate, as 50 people responded to the survey. So all your inputs are very important, and they will definitely help us improve our platform or strengthen our community. And I would like to thank Annie Harvius, our Department Communication and Relations Coordinator, for all her work in putting together the survey and helping organizing this workshop. So for the sake of time today, we will not go through all the question and answers in detail from the survey. We will have a brief presentation of each communication and community engagement platforms, present a brief summary of the survey, and mostly open a broader discussion with the group based on questions we select from your responses. However, the entire survey responses are available for you upon request, so you can contact us and we will send you the survey to you as soon as possible. So today's session is being recorded and will be available later via YouTube. So now I handle the floor to Charlene, so we can start with our small presentations.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I think most of you are aware that I'm the editor of the Oat newsletter, I'm Charlene White, and I will give you a quick little presentation, assuming I can call it up here. And there, I'm hoping everybody can see that. So this will be part one of our discussion, and I'll just go through the history of this a bit because the newsletter has actually been around for a very long time. So it was started in 1950, and this was by the National Oat Conference in the United States. And it was edited and printed first at Cornell University, and Neil Jensen was the editor. So that's where everything got started. And whoops. Oh, don't tell me, now I'm having trouble with, I was having trouble earlier, and now for some reason, let me try this. Oh, that works. Okay, good. Yeah, so its purpose was to supplement these uniform nursery reports that were being sent around and shared by all the breeders at the time back in the day. And so the newsletter included three basic types of information. So minutes and proceedings of the conferences and various meetings, short articles that presented various research updates, and then announcements from the community concerning the different members. So this was expanded over the years, many more different types of contributions and so on, and people from outside the United States started contributing as well. So eventually the National Oat Conference itself became the American Oat Workers Conference. That happened in 1974. And then after that, the International Oat Conference group was established in 1982. And so the group, you know, it went from being the smaller group in the US to encompassing oat workers from around the world. Newsletter went online, as that's the way everything was going. And it was hosted by the USDA ARS on the Grain Genes website, and it actually still is. So in 2014, you know, interest in the newsletter, though, had really begun to wane, and people were beginning to communicate in ways that were different. You didn't have to use regular postal mail anymore. Long distance calls were cheaper. I mean, email was a thing certainly used by everybody by then, but there were also fewer people who were working on oats. And so our community was really starting to shrink. And at the AOW meeting in 2014, there was a question, you know, should we even continue with the Oat newsletter? And of course, we decided yes, because people still needed to connect, but we needed something a little bit more dynamic and interactive. And that's the year I was elected as editor. And so, it's okay, there are different ways we can make this happen. Let's do it. Whoops, oh my goodness. So sorry. I've just locked myself out of my computer. There we go. Okay, so I don't expect anybody to read this. But these are from the actual minutes of that AOWC business meeting in 2014. So there were two resolutions about the Oat newsletter. The first was that it would have its own designated site, which was oatnews.org. Again, it's hosted though by the USDA. And the same type of material would be in the newsletter. Also, though, it was decided that all the back issues of the newsletter would be made available electronically. And so it was with thanks to Mark Sorrells from Cornell and PepsiCo, particularly Gabe Guzmini, for sponsoring the digitization of all of that. So all of that older material is actually available on the current website, which was, I figure, is really important. So this is what it looks like now. Again, there's the URL, oatnews.org. And this was set up using Drupal, and it was actually Gerard Lazo who helped get this all set up. He's with the USDA. So this is what you see when you go to the home page. And on the home page, every time I update the newsletter, I always write a little blurb and incorporate, well, quite a lot of material into that blurb with links to various other things, not only within the newsletter, on the newsletter site, but also outside of it as well. And those stories, of course. And I'd also like at this point to thank Shay Miller, because she's the one who actually goes through all of these things for me and makes sure I haven't said something really stupid. So thank you, Shay, for that. Now you can see also there on the right, there's a button there for Speaking of Oats. And at this point, I'd like to point out that Steve Michael became the person at USDA who was site administrator, and he's actually on the call today. So if anyone has particular questions about the site itself, then hopefully, Steve will be able to answer those. And I would also, of course, like to thank Steve for all his help with the newsletter. So if you click on that button that I just showed you, you do end up on a page for Speaking of Oats. And I'm not going to go into this right now. I mean, you guys are here because of Speaking of Oats. And also Pablo's going to address that a little bit later on, because it is actually presented by the Oat Global Group. So if we go down to the bottom of the home page of the newsletter, there are a couple of different things there. One is tweets from the Twitter account. So the Oat newsletter also does have this Twitter account that I set up, and actually it now has 2,190 followers as of this morning. So not too shabby. And that's different people from all walks of life. It's not a lot of farmers, there are a lot of consumers, as well as researchers and other people from all around the world. So all of the tweets, you can either go to Twitter directly, and the URL for that is at the top of the screen, or you can take a look at the tweets on the newsletter homepage. So on the other side there on the right, we have upcoming events. So there is a calendar, and you can also get to the calendar through the navigation bar on the left-hand side of any of the pages. Now, everything else, we have all these links in the bar across the top of each page. So I'm just going to go quickly through each one and what's available underneath in the drop-down menus. So research, for example, there is a volume, there is a page for each particular year. So we're now in volume 59 for 2022. And that's also where the archives is. And you can go into the archives and take a look at all of these digitized copies of the old issues of the newsletter. And I also have something there for historical documents of varying kinds that people might find useful. Meetings, the obvious ones, at least to me, I'm sure there are many others we could add, are there. So American Oat Workers, the International Oat Conferences, meetings that Oat Global has held. You can also get to the Speaking of Oats page from here. And then there is a section for other smaller meetings where people can add information. So in terms of community news, there is a Hall of Fame. These are people who received the distinguished, award for distinguished service to oat improvement from the American Oat Workers, and retirements, lists of people received, things like that are all in the Hall of Fame. We have an image gallery, which you can see there. There are some recipes. Articles in community news are pieces that people have submitted, just letting us know what's going on. And I also started a kids section, sort of a get them while they're young type of thing. Then I have these 3 pages, and these are sort of single pages, nomenclature, germplasm, and pathology. So nomenclature and germplasm I put there because we actually do have committees for those things. So they were both under AOW. They are now under the International Oat Conference. So, and then pathology I added as well because Oat Global had its sort of Oat Rust Initiative. And so a lot of the information there came from that, although I've tried to broaden it out to include other pathogens as well. And again, there are other types of pages that could be added that aren't here, agronomy or food, milling, various types of things. There's a links page, several of them actually. So there are links there to Oat Global, T3 Oat, that database. I see Jean-Luc Yannick is on the call, so he's in charge of that. Grain Genes and Tanner Shen is in charge of that. He's also on the call. And then there's this additional links page where I've just kind of tried to put everything I can find about anybody who has anything to do with oats. But of course, as I've already said, many of the pages that I have described here really could use a lot of work. I am, however, one person, and there are people, I do have help from a number of different people, of course, but I'm hoping to get a little bit more. So under the About tab, there's actually a statement about the Oat newsletter. The contacts, that's basically me and Steve Michael. Guidelines for submission, because there are specific guidelines, particularly when it comes to the research reports. And then 2 things you can subscribe to. So to subscribe to the Oat newsletter itself, to receive my email notifications, and I think pretty much all of you on the call are on my list already, you just need to send a note to me at oatnewsletter@gmail.com. And I will subscribe you to my list. I will also unsubscribe people if they so wish. Don't like to do that, but of course I will do it. If anyone is interested in joining the WeChat group, you can also just send me a note to that address as well. We also have this thing called Oatmail, and Oatmail is a little bit different. There's a big description there that I'm not going to go into, but it was meant to be sort of an email forum for discussion where it's not just me who can see where the messages, or well, that's not entirely true. Not everyone can see where the messages go, but people can interact directly. They can reply to the emails and they can also send emails to the group. Although that is moderated, they do have to be approved. So my last slide, this again was from that very first volume in 1950, a message from K.S. Quisenberry, saying how pleased he was that the Oat newsletter was being started. And the key thing from here is at the end, basically, its success will depend on the cooperation of all workers. And there's so many things that could be done with this website and so on and so forth. And depending on what people want, yes, I'm looking forward to hearing people's feedback and seeing if others would be interested in helping really create a newsletter that serves more people, is of more use to people, and that people enjoy. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn things over to Pablo.
Thank you so much, Charlene. So I will share my screen now and see if everybody can see it. I will share a few slides on Oat Global, and I saw that Tom and Eric are present here. So then in the discussion section, they are most welcome to jump in and add more information on the Oat Global. So Oat Global is another communication and engagement platform for the Oat community, and it's public-private partnerships that with the objective to coordinate and connect all researchers and oat extension professionals worldwide with each other and with individuals along the entire value chain. It's led by the Stakman-Borlaug Center for Sustainable Plant Health at the University of Minnesota and comprise participants from academia, industry, the oat commodity, and other stakeholder groups. Oat Global has four main goals or objectives. It's first to coordinate the global oat research and extension activities, facilitate communication across the worldwide oat community, advocate for and secure funding to support pre-competitive oat research, breeding, and extension, and also provide a platform for the formation of both public-private and also public and public partnerships. So Oat Global is led by a board of directors that comprise 10 members that include a collection of interest researchers, producers, and industry representatives. The board of directors set the strategy direction and manage the portfolio of individual oat initiatives. We have voting members that require a financial support to Oat Global, and also non-voting members that it's offered on a rotating basis that guarantee a good representation across the oat community. So since its inception, Oat Global has been involved in 3 initiatives: the Oat Rust Initiatives, the International Oat Nurseries, and the Speaking of Oats webinar. So the Oat Rust Initiative, it is a global response to a global oat community coming together to develop a community-wide research and extension approaches to mitigate the risk of rust diseases, in particular ground rust. And it started in 2015 under the name of the Oat Rust Forum. And at that time, oat experts from both the US and Canada got together on an annual basis to discuss research in the area and develop community-wide strategies to provide sustainable solutions to this problem. And it was keeping pretty active until the COVID pandemic started. So from the Oat Rust Forum is when the Oat Rust Initiative derived from, and it's currently assembling into project teams that work on specific goals of the strategy. Also, Oat Global is committed to supporting the International Oat Nursery. So 2 members of the Oat Global Board of Directors are members of the International Nursery Executive Committee. And also, Oat Global is trying to have a Zoom conversation with Stephen to start see what other involvement or how Oat Global can contribute in a better way to the international nursery as well. And finally, we are all here. Oat Global is being involved in the Speaking of Oats. And Speaking of Oats, it's a partnership between the Oat Global and the Oat newsletter, as Charlene presented earlier. And it was initiated in 2020 in response to the cancellation of all these in-person conference and meeting because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the main objective of Speaking of Oats is, first of all, to keep the oat community connected by providing a place where we can share and discuss the different type of work being undertaken by all the members of our community throughout the entire value chain. So far, since the beginning, 17 webinars have been presented, and the series will continue and now featuring between 7 and 8 webinars per year. So we have a web page, and you can see here on the screen, and you can, with any questions or initiative, or you want to connect with Oat Global, this is our web page, and here, highlighted blue, it's the link when you can reach us. So with this, I think we can, let me stop sharing. And so that was a brief overview on Oat Global and the other communication and engagement platform. But the idea of this workshop was to hear from you. So based on the survey that we share with you, we came out with a set of questions that we like to bring to the group so we can have like an open discussion, so we can gather more opinions and ideas to help us improve our platforms. So I handle that to you, Annie.
Yeah, thank you all so much for providing feedback by taking the survey. It was extremely educational and helpful. We met as kind of a core team yesterday to discuss the results, and overall, we're really happy with what we found. We were glad to see that people had pretty good awareness and satisfaction with the Oat newsletter, as well as with Speaking of Oats, and that people see a lot of potential for benefit with Oat Global, as well as appreciation for the community that it's created thus far. So without further ado, I'll just kind of introduce some questions. We're on screen share right now, but so that we get a better kind of feeling of intimacy, what I'm going to do is I'll kind of release a set of questions, show you on the screen, and then I'll drop them in the chat and go off screen share mode so that people can discuss and have a little more of an actual face-to-face conversation. So we'll start with the Oat newsletter. The Oat newsletter does not currently receive a lot of input from the broader community. How can we collaborate and participate? Would you want to be part of a regional group for your location or continent? Do you want more international news? And if so, would you be willing to provide it, or, you know, just send some links, be a source kind of thing? Is there anything you think could be improved on the website? And do you have an interest in creating original content for the newsletter? So I'm going to stop my share now, and I'll drop those questions in the chat. And the floor is open. I will screen share again in about 10 minutes and drop the next set of questions.
Actually, before we get into that a little bit, I was a bit remiss. I forgot to mention that actually Mike McMullen and Jean-Luc Yannick were also both editors of the newsletter in the past. So I'd like to thank them for their contributions to the newsletter as well. So I suppose one thing too I could mention that I didn't go into to get this going is there is actually an editorial board for the newsletter, but that's really meant more to be for dealing with some of the science, for example. So if somebody submits a research article, there are supposed to be 2 people who take a look at that. So it's sort of quasi peer reviewed. It's not just me going, oh, okay, that looks good, and sticking it on the website. It does have to go through 2 different people. And the structure of the board was expanded in 2014. And part of the idea was to try to include more people from different parts of the world. But I think at this point, particularly depending on what people want to see with the newsletter moving forward, we may need sort of a more parallel kind of committee. And that was asked about in the survey, whether people would be interested in helping out in that sort of thing. So looking for ideas. What do people think of all of this?
So I can chime in if nobody else wants to, just from an industry perspective, is like a consumer of info, you know, it is not a 2-way flow. You know, we're, at least for PepsiCo, it's like we can say certain things, but it's, you know, predominantly like, okay, keep a tabs on what the public sector is doing. I definitely think that there's more potential for internationally focused things. I don't necessarily think that a regional one would be. I don't know if there would be enough content for, like, you know, upper Midwest, even into Canada, you know, regional things. It's like, okay, what's all the oat breeders in North America could fit in an elevator. So I don't necessarily know if splitting that up would be effective. I think, I guess that there's certainly stuff from particularly Canadian groups, and I'm thinking, you know, predominantly like CDC Ag Canada, or AFC rather, and a few of the like larger breeding programs there, that it's like there is definitely info that looking into the programs is incredibly useful to get, that's not making its way to the Oat newsletter. So like, for example, the CDC breeding updates, you know, Aaron gives updates, writes these really nice, excellent reports every few years or so. I've gone back and read to see kind of what he's doing, what he's up to. That's the sort of stuff that I think could be really useful to have linked. But again, I'll say this with a caveat of like, I'm not allowed to send that stuff out. I'm somebody asking for further updates from public sector, you know, and I know that is, everyone has a lot to do. I think the website question, I would just, one of my few kind of strong opinions about what could be improved. I mean, the Oat newsletter got, what is it, almost everybody, 97% of people said it was good or very good. I think that's a perfectly fine answer to be like, it's mostly great. I would honestly say the one formatting change I'd make is that the front page, I mean, these aren't long updates, they're maybe a paragraph total, you know, split up into a few sentences. I think just having everything on the front page versus a read more tab, I think personally would be useful. I don't think it would be overly cluttered, and then you can control F stuff a little bit more easily. You can see what's in there. So like looking at, you know, the latest one was late August, about a month ago. You know, questions, you know, that's what is it, a few hundred words total, just stick it on the front page versus having to click out to the read more.
Yeah, some of them are a lot longer than others. It sort of depends what type and how much information I have to share. But certainly if that's a hindrance for people, and that has actually crossed my mind in the past, that maybe people weren't clicking on that read more button. So, I mean, that's perhaps something we could try. Steve would have to sort that out for us, but I don't imagine that's terribly difficult. Is it, Steve?
Sorry, I was silenced. No, it shouldn't be too hard. A couple hours work.
Yeah, okay, so that's something we can try to do to see if people like that. It could also always be put back if people found it annoying, I suppose. In terms of the breeding updates and things you were just talking about, yes, I mean, I would love to see more of that kind of thing. I think one of the issues people are having that prevents them from submitting, for example, you know, more research reports in particular, is that people are worried now about copyright issues some of the time, and whether or not they'll be able then to publish that information in a journal. Because I have, I can write this up, I can't tell you this, I could tell you this, and then they end up kind of not sending anything because it's gotten too complex. And then other people, even with presentations from conferences, is like, no, please don't put my slide deck up, because if the journal sees it, they're going to reject my paper because it's been published elsewhere. So I think part of all of this is that the landscape has changed when it comes to how people are sharing information, and restrictions placed on researchers by journals and so on and so forth. And then too, yeah, proprietary information. Used to be field days, sort of anybody and everybody would come and hear everything. And now things are kind of a lot more divided up. There's a lot more concern for IP, that type of thing. I don't know if maybe others have a different perspective on that. Or not.
Well, if the floor is open again, then dipping back to the question of how much stuff is included everywhere, I would say, I mean, I read the Oat newsletter. It's a predominant way that I keep in touch with stuff because we're kind of siloed off, isolated, you know. I'm not working on papers, as it were, in the industry here, but I would also, I think it would be useful, or I would certainly welcome the change to so like, let's take the June 30th one, like the quality oats, you know, one of the recent ones from this summer. I think honestly, I'll stick in all the stuff that's on the post, you know, that's on the node on oatnews.org in the email. To me, that seems perfectly fine. You know, it's, if the hot links don't work, copied over, or if the HTML links don't work, just straight copied over into the email. But, you know, whatever. I think having that could get a few more eyeballs over to the thing, over to the newsletter itself. So I would welcome that change as well, in the same vein of like more stuff delivered, you know, versus a truncated form of the newsletter going out and then saying, hey, click here for more info. I think it could fit all in an email.
Okay, so basically what you're suggesting is taking the same blurb, because I tend to call them blurbs, from the homepage, and just put that into the email?
I would honestly, yeah. I mean, that's my thought on this. Is I think it would be perfectly fine to get that email out there versus saying, here's some of the blurb. So like looking at this one from, you know, the 30th, it was some of the highlights were there, you know, saying, okay, submit your abstract for IOC, you know, what's in the letter. I mean, again, it's what, a few paragraphs. I would copy and paste the whole darn thing and send it on the email.
I guess just to respond, there were a couple of reasons why I wasn't just pasting the whole blurb in, because I mean, I take your point, you know, I have to try to shorten it, which is actually additional work for me. So in some sense, it's a lot easier for me just to plunk it all in the email. One reason was I kind of wanted people to have to go to the newsletter site so that they could then see what other things were there, et cetera, et cetera. And the other reason was, I know that sometimes people look at an email and if they see that it's long, they're kind of like, ugh, and they won't bother reading it. So I guess I was concerned that fewer people might actually read it and become engaged if the emails seem to be too long.
There is a balance that needs to be struck. Just as someone who works in communications, like there is the problem that you lose people if you ask them to click to somewhere else. But also if the email is longer than what could be copy and pasted into maybe 2, sometimes 3 pages of a Word document, you'll really start to lose people. So I think it's about creating an appropriate length of teaser and only including the whole article if it's something really urgent. That's just, again, one opinion from me, a communications worker and not an Oats worker. Yeah, just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you so much for your feedback.
We could certainly try it again, you know, give it a try and see what
Totally.
you think. And then if people don't like that, oh no, I'm not going to read all of that. I want to, you know, then fine. And if they do like it, yeah, then great.
You could also have 1 or 2 focus articles that are in full and then link to other things. Does anyone else in the room want to speak up or share an opinion on that? You don't have to go camera on if you don't want to. Just, we'd love to hear your opinion.
Apparently not. Everyone's quiet. Steve, there you go.
I'm probably in the doesn't read long emails group. I kind of like it the way it is.
Thank you. Good to know. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Anyone else? A short response from a short email. I love it. Anyone else want to add?
Yeah, all of Steve's emails are always very short and direct. That's very true. Perhaps I could try doing something a little more middle ground, though, you know, the way Annie is suggesting, sort of. Yeah, I could try that again. Would that work, Steve, if they were if they were slightly longer?
Yeah, I mean, anything is fine. I'll read until I decide I need to move on and go from there.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, well, maybe because some of them are fairly short. Yeah, and I could just put the whole thing in there. But for the longer ones, yeah, maybe. Right, we'll see what we can sort out for that then. Thank you.
So I got a comment to make. So based on the survey, it seems like the community highly value the newsletter, or were like useful resource, really positive comments. But sometimes we don't realize that this platform relies on pretty much one person, and a lot of time, effort put on this. So my question will be like, how can we make this newsletter more like a community effort rather than just one person initiative? I know everybody's super busy with many things, but how we can think in a way where the community can contribute in any way to make this newsletter more like a group of person effort rather than just one, as it is right now mostly.
Yeah, I suppose part of that's my fault because, you know, I could be reaching out a little bit more to people. But currently, so the current situation is, because this is an elected position with this particular group, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada allows me to spend roughly half an hour a day or, 2.5 hours a week on the newsletter. But of course, the way I've ended up setting it up, and of course, that's partly my fault too, just because I'm interested in a lot of things. It takes me a lot longer than that, and partly because of the Twitter feed as well. Get a lot of information to share through the Twitter feed. So in some ways it's become a little bit of a hobby, and I mean, I do enjoy it. 99% of the time it's great and it's kind of fun, and so that's okay. But the person coming after me may not be willing to do that, and there are times when it does get a little bit, oh no, I have to do this and there's this deadline, and it would be kind of nice to have a few more people involved. Again, I don't have a really clear idea of how people might want to become more involved or how they could become more involved. Even just submitting more material would actually be really useful. But I am up for re-elect. Well, okay, I was elected again in 2018, and because of COVID now, this next term is turning into 6 years instead of 4. So in 2024, that's the next AOW meeting, and that's when the position will be up for election. And I mean, yeah, I do enjoy doing this. There's a good chance if people want me to continue that I would continue. But at some point too, I'm going to retire. So we also do have to think of how this can continue on in the future as well.
Charlene, I was wondering if there's this is Tom Rebay at General Mills. Is there a way that I participate in some other newsletters, both on the, internally at General Mills and then externally through some other organizations I belong to, but we periodically just send out like the email reminder solicitation. If you have topics you want to include in the upcoming Oat newsletter, send them my way. I think what happens to me sometimes is, I mean, I don't know that I would share anything, but is there a schedule that you always send out it's usually, is it almost like, I mean, the end of the month usually is kind of the target, or the beginning of the month, it kind of just seems to happen a little bit randomly when they come out, but so I just kind of throw that out there that you can solicit occasionally, ideas, if somebody could, because I know you say you're getting a lot of it off of social media, but there could be some other topics that people might be willing to email if they get that reminder from you like a week in advance of it coming out or something.
Right. Actually, and you're quite correct. It is more or less random, because at the beginning I tried to keep things more to a schedule, but then I would find I either had things that, should be shared sooner because there were deadlines and so on, or I just didn't have enough material. I
Sure.
mean, now I have, more material is available because of the Twitter
Mhm.
account and so on. But I mean, yes, it is kind of a random thing. I don't have fixed deadlines, and that would, of course, so people aren't thinking, oh, I have to get something in by this time. But
Yeah.
the frequency of it, yeah, it is largely dictated by events coming up, job openings, this type of thing that have deadlines. And I don't always, sometimes I do receive things with lots of time, and that's really great. Other times it's like, ooh, do you think you could put this in? It's due next week. And you're, sure, okay, I have this much material backed up, I'll put something together. So, I mean, yes, the fact that it is kind of higgledy-piggledy is a bit of an issue. But yeah, I mean, I was starting to say for a while, don't forget to send me stuff. And I suppose I did kind of stop. So
And
yeah,
maybe the social media people posting on, Twitter, maybe there's some people maybe assume that's like, well, I'll just put it out here and Charlene picks it up and gets it in the newsletter. Maybe that's kind of doing some of that without you having to solicit on a periodic basis for ideas or posts or something like that.
yeah. In fact, I pick up a lot of stuff on Twitter, and I used to do those web harvest articles where I would put all the different links to the various kinds of stories and sort them by topic. But that was actually a huge amount of work. And I mean, I'm not averse to doing it if people find it useful. But I got the impression that people weren't really reading those. So I did stop doing that as well. But yeah, I can certainly try sending out some information.
Just
yeah,
to
I
be
just don't like to be
mindful of,
too annoying.
just to
Sorry,
be
Annie.
just to be mindful of time. Does anyone else want to make any comments about the newsletter before we move on to the Speaking of Oats seminars? All right, moving it right along then.
Thanks.
So
Yeah, that's some good feedback. Thank you.
yeah, thank you, everyone. So kind of a little bit narrower of a topic for this one. The webinar versus meeting format, like right now you see we're in a meeting format, we can see each other on video, you can talk. This is different than what we usually do for these, which is a webinar format where, you know, you can type in questions and stuff like that, but it's a little less participatory. Do you prefer keeping those in webinar format, or would you be interested in either throwing in meetings sometimes or converting to meetings? And then additionally, is there a topic you feel like we don't hit as often that you would like to see or hear more about?
I much prefer a meeting format to a webinar format.
I'll
All
chime in
right.
on the opposite then. I like the webinar because nobody can unmute. And there's always somebody who doesn't mute their mic on every comment. But it is nice to be able to ask questions in person, but I'll chime for webinar.
Anyone else?
I participate in a grad student seminar group with about 60 grad students that we call Plant Breeding Gumbo. And it's all open mic and everyone behaves. So to me, it's a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah, I
Does
tend to
anyone
think
else have an opinion on that before our leadership chimes in?
we're all staying very quiet today.
Yeah, this is a focus group, so we are here to get your feedback.
I think both have their value. I guess I see it both ways. I appreciate Tyre's comments. I also appreciate Steve's comments. It seems to me, you know, a group like this is perfect. You know, smaller or medium size, maybe it is up to like 60 or something like that. It depends on the topic at hand. But then there are times where we've got like 1 or 2 or 3 really key, you know, speakers, and they've got a pretty lengthy presentation, and there's going to be 45 minutes of presentation. And to me, then I'm kind of fine with just tuning in on as a webinar. And so, yeah, I guess it's kind of almost a little bit like a case by case. It'd be nice if you could do the webinar portion kind of as is, and then convert the meeting to that, you know, kind of where everybody can kind of like chime in and see each other's faces and kind of do the stick around and have that conversation that is so valuable.
What do people think about having a mixture of webinars and meetings? And again, we'd love to hear from people we haven't heard from yet, but.
I think it's case by case. I'd be supportive of that for sure. A mix.
We could maybe, I don't know what.
Tomas?
Oh, sorry.
Tomas, you're unmuted. Did you want to say something? Going once, going twice. All right, go ahead, Charlene.
Sorry, I was just thinking one of the things they tried at work, and granted, I actually haven't had the time to participate, was they had started having these sort of drop-in sessions where people just kind of get together and talk about whatever they want to talk about. And I don't know that leaving things that open for this group would necessarily be a good thing, but perhaps there could be the odd session, maybe a 9th one every year or something, where the floor just was kind of open and people who wanted to could join, and or you know, we could maybe suggest a broad topic and then people could just discuss. I don't know, what do people think of something like that?
Yeah, I would like to add to this. So it's, at least my opinion is that Speaking of Oats has been great opportunity for keeping the community together. In particular, during the COVID time, it was a chance for us to see each other every month, every other month, usually with the typical seminar format, right? But I think it gives us a great opportunity as well to bring some topic on the table and have a discussion like we are having today. I don't know with what frequency it is and how people will like that, but I think it's it's a great chance, great tool we have to connect people from Australia, from Europe, from here, and having all in the same room and open the discussion. It will be a matter to maybe come out with a set of topics of interest that the community would like to discuss, and maybe alternate, give some typical seminar format, but maybe every 3-4 months have an open discussion like this, when we can bring a topic of interest on the table and get everybody engaged.
Any thoughts on that?
Suppose
All
we-
right, with that, we'll keep it moving and do the, sorry, we only have 10 minutes left, Charlene, so I really want to get
No, no
people's
worries.
opinions on Oat Global. All right. All right, can everyone see? So a lot of people responded to the survey about Oat Global with a good idea of what Oat Global could be and things that they've liked in the past that they want to see expanded on. Oat Global was relatively dormant during the pandemic. Of course, working on a couple things during it, but we're open to suggestions, especially about how to meaningfully form a more truly global network, how Oat Global can better serve your oat work and community in future programming, and also what kinds of contact from Oat Global you'd like.
So based on the survey, like Annie was saying, there was maybe about a quarter of the respondents that were not really sure about what was the objective, the role of Oat Global, and they were requesting more visibility from the from Oat Global to the oat community, and in particular, how to expand it to become more global. So this is why we wanted to hear from you, open the discussion, and see what are the different ways that you will expect Oat Global to reach the community. And also I will add to this list of questions is there any pressing or particular area of research that you think Oat Global to put a dent on or focus in promoting partnership, help securing funding, or coordinate the research itself?
Well, since it's a quiet floor, I guess I'll chime in. It's reading some of the comments from the survey response PDF. I feel a lot of those of like it's a little unclear what outside of the core initiatives of is you've got Speaking of Oats, ION, and the Rust Initiative. What are the goals of Oat Global outside of that? And even, you know, for dramatic effects, like my boss is on Oat Global, I'm still not exactly sure what she does at those meetings, you know. It's I think getting clarity about like what are the initiatives. Is this to have is it something that exists to be running events? Is it something that exists to be coordinating industry funding of public-private things or public-public? Are there forums that Oat Global is supposed to be running outside of the Oat newsletter? It's like Oat newsletter, and you know, got very glowing reviews, and so Speaking of Oats in the responses, and people seem to be a little bit more confused about the role of Oat Global. To me, I guess that would be the principal question: is what outside of the Rust Initiative, the ION, which I know PepsiCo pulled back from, and the newsletter / the seminar series, what's the intended goal of Oat Global? Is it further communication to fund projects? Is it, yeah, I guess that's an open question. I'll stop repeating here.
Can I just mention? So Oat Global actually has nothing to do with the Oat newsletter per se. The Oat newsletter is run by the American Oat Workers. So the two groups are, I mean, there's a lot of overlap between the two groups, but they're not really connected. So, but we work together for Speaking of Oats, yes, and Oat Global takes the lead in Speaking of Oats. But Oat Global doesn't really have any say in what happens in terms of the, the guidelines and so on that the Oat newsletter operates on.
Yeah, Tara, I think you bring up some great points. I've been around Oat Global since its inception with one of your other former employees, Gabe Gusmini, who really led the charge on getting that set up. And it was us and Grain Millers and even Richardson's at the time putting it together. And you're right, it was to be a hub to bring research efforts together and to help organize and get behind research needs that were important to the industry, and also to try to make some of the awareness to avoid duplication. I think, as Pablo shared, the Oat Rust Initiative was a great place to start, because Crown Rust was kind of one of the problems that everybody was facing, regardless of kind of where they're at. And so we did do a pretty decent job of bringing the community together, sharing strategies, coordinating research ideas. And then it was so that was good for 3 years. And then we were just like, then we got into the big debate about okay, pre-competitive space, that's good. So Crown Rust, that's wonderful. But then we spent a lot of time kind of discussing okay, what about more beta glucan? What about milling traits? What about this? And then we kind of ran into these roadblocks as well, how do we, as maybe competitors in a sense, but also focus on maybe some of those post-competitive, like milling efficiency and beta glucan and other nutritional characteristics of oats. So that was maybe a little bit of what slowed us down. I think the other thing that really slowed us down was money, funding. Well, who's going to give us money to do these things when principal investigators can apply for grants, whether through their own government or through other funding agencies? So that was another area that we ran into, because Oat Global is funded by General Mills, Quaker, Grain Millers, and Richardson's. And Richardson's has since pulled out of the conversation of supporting Oat Global. And so it takes money to run Oat Global as well. And I think that's a little bit of the next challenge that we've approached, that we've run into. So I think your question is super valid. It's one that, as being a board member, I talk about too. It's like, what is Oat Global going to grow up to be someday? What do we want it to do? Maybe the Oat Rust Initiative that was started back in 2015. Maybe that was kind of the thing, or maybe it needs to be revisited. So definitely open to your comments or thoughts. Maybe it's emailed later. I know you mentioned that your boss Pat is on the, after Gabe left, Pat by default got that position, and so that's a little bit more of the background there. But yeah, so that's and there's even more history there, and how we were closely associated with the North American Milling Association, NAMA. NAMA was much more involved in some of these oat research funding mechanisms as well too, and they wanted to get out of the business of funding research. And so that was a little bit of the kind of the path there. Was NAMA wanted to get out of being involved in oat research, so then Oat Global was created, because a lot of the same people that were part of the NAMA Oat Committee really were the ones that started Oat Global.
So I would think, so like using a case study of like the W courts with PGDC, PepsiCo's on those, a Quaker's on those, a lot of folks here weigh in on those PGDC guidelines. I think something like that brought more broadly for North America, or more broadly globally, could be really useful, where it's basically like, okay, what are we willing to say about what our targets and priorities are? What are we willing, some of those conversations that happened at the PGDC meeting, it's like, hey, what should our thins targets be? Like, do we want 4.8% beta glucan? Should that be our cut? Some of these basic things. And from my perspective, certainly agronomy would be more useful to understand what the various grower groups want, connection across that scale. After yield, I'm still not quite sure, and I hear different things from POGA. Is maturity or is lodging resistance second after that? Where would people rank that in terms of priorities? Is that what growers feel, what different ways about that? So questions like that, I think, could be really valuable globally. And then international germplasm exchange, are we going to ship stuff from Australia to the prairies of Canada? Probably not. But what do they have there? What are they working on? What are their challenges? I think a formal, maybe thinking of like, okay, what explicit one thing should Oat Global coordinate next? I think some sort of event could be very useful where we say, okay, what do you select for? You know, it's I've got pre and post competitive stuff, but you know, we weigh in at the PGDC meeting every year, and we say, okay, we want this. This is more important to us than this. You know, grow percent is more important than thins, et cetera, et cetera.
I think you highlight the fact that there's other forums out there that we do talk about those things. And you're right, because we're active on, the PGDC committee, as is, Paul Richter. But yeah, no, it's a good question. A challenge, I think a little bit of a challenge we're facing. So
Yeah, that was the reason we wanted also to hear from the community, from you, and gather more ideas and to help us, the board, the group of Oat Global, see what direction we're going to go and how we can be more effective in supporting the community, which is our main goal here. Yeah. So it's 11 a.m. here, so it passed an hour already, and we don't want to take much more of your time. So now, before wrapping up, if there is any last comment or suggestion that you want to bring to the table, that will be most welcome. If not, you have our emails, so any further ideas or opinions or comments are still welcome for us to receive.
I do have the information for the next webinar, which is going to be in November, so I can put that up. And then if anyone still could make a comment while this is being shown. Let's see if my computer works this time. Yay, I think that's working. So yeah, next time we'll be hearing about a couple of European projects. So perhaps that will also give people here some ideas about how we can bring everybody together.
Yeah, and we thank you again for participating in the webinar, for your inputs, for filling the survey. That's a really good contribution to all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for your feedback, everyone.
Thank you.